Okay, hi everyone. We are going to get started. I'm going to introduce our first speaker of the afternoon, Dr. Elise Gornish. Elise, if you'd like to get your slideshow started while I give your introduction, you're welcome to. So Dr. Elise Gornish is a cooperative extension specialist in ecological restoration at the University of Arizona. Her research and outreach program largely focuses on identifying strategies for successful restoration in arid land systems and integration of restoration approaches into weed management. We're very excited to have Dr. Gornish here to present her team's work on seed ball research. Looks like you're all set. Go ahead and take
Thanks,
it away.
Maria. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the dinosaurs. And hello to the land of Zoom. So I'm going to talk about seed balls, which if you know me at all, you know I'm sort of obsessed with them. Okay. Seed balls are super important for lots of reasons. Okay. We all know that restoration is hard in arid systems. So this is a sort of section where a lot of people from the Southwest are going to be talking, and mostly in the Southwest, we have arid and semi-arid systems. Restoration is hard everywhere for sure, but in arid and semi-arid systems, it's super difficult. And there's lots of reasons for this, right? In this kind of dated paper now, it's from 2016, says that there's less than 5% success in seeding efforts in the Western US. Oh, you could see my presenter view. Okay, sorry guys, give me 1 second. I kind of don't know. Oh, display settings, hold on. We good now?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Thanks, great. Elise. Okay, when I see the chat come up like very early on the talk, I'm like, uh-oh. Okay, so we're good. Thanks for sticking with me, guys. Okay, so arid restoration is hard. Arid land restoration is hard. This 2016 paper talks about there being less than 5% success in seeding efforts. A much more recent paper that I really should have put up on here, but that just came out from Copeland and colleagues have upped this number a little bit. I think it's like 7 to 11%. But in general, we usually get dismal results from arid land restoration. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but we can kind of clump the reasons of why arid land restoration is hard into these two sort of sections, right? So there's seed loss when we're talking about seed-based restoration. There's seed loss due to desiccation stress. So you just throw the seeds out there, they lay on the soil surface and the sun just bakes them and they die. You can have seeds blow away, particularly when it's really dry because there's no seed to soil surface. And there's a lot of granivores out there, everything from small mammals to ants. And then of course, if your seeds are able to germinate, often you get this soil crust development on top of them. So when rain comes down and encourages the seeds to germinate, all those little raindrops are actually displacing little bits of soil all over the place. That displaced soil can actually end up on top of your seeds, dry, and then when the seedling comes up, it can't actually poke through that soil crust. Really sucks. Okay, however, seed balls might be to the rescue. So if you're not familiar with seed balls in general are sort of a concoction of seed, a little bit of water, a binding agent like clay, and some kind of nutrient component like manure or soil. You kind of wrap all this stuff together and you can make these balls, and they can directly address the challenges associated with arid land restoration for seed-based restoration. So for example, the seed balls weigh a little more than seeds, right? Because you have all the stuff around it. So that keeps the seeds from being blown away. And that sort of shell around the seed ball of the dried nutrients and clay or binding agent protects the seeds on the inside of the seed balls from most granivores and from desiccation stress from the sun. So you have these seed balls, you throw them out on the landscape, and then when water comes, it sort of melts the seed ball away. And what you get is this little pool of nutrients where the seedlings can grow. So you can see in this right picture, I think it's a poppy, an Arizona poppy, but you see this little seedling coming out of this little pool of nutrients, okay? So you're actually fueling that little seedling that they often die, okay? You might have heard of seed balls referred to as seed bombs or seed pellets. There's a whole world associated with seed balls. And I wanna just tell you a little bit about the history of seed balls because it's kind of relevant. So seed balls are super, super ancient. The oldest written text that I could find about seed balls comes from 1 AD or descriptions of 1 AD, where in China, they mixed seeds with the bones of horses and mealworms into a soup, hence the soup, and they threw out seed balls, and this was for agriculture, okay? Pliny the Elder in 70 AD talked about mixing seeds and poop of some kind and throwing them out on the landscape also for agriculture. In about the 1900s, seed balls became regularly used in agriculture, and today there's like all kinds of machines that make these perfect seed balls for tomatoes and all kinds of things. But it wasn't until the 1950s that a dentist came up with the idea of like, maybe we should use seed balls and throw them out of the back of airplanes for restoration. And that's exactly what the government did. So the BLM in the 1950s were throwing seed balls outside of planes in burned areas in the Southwest. And it was a dismal failure. This might have had something to do with the fact that most of the seed balls were sort of coming apart in the airplane, and a lot of the seed that they were using was like super old, but who knows? So it fell out of favor because they weren't working. But in the 1970s, interest was renewed because people were getting really into like guerrilla gardening. So you can take seed balls and kind of throw them anywhere, and hopefully your native plants will grow. And then finally, in the 2000s, you have a couple of labs like mine. There are some labs in Australia and then labs in Oregon that are really thinking about how we can actually sort of mechanize the creation of seed balls for widespread development and deployment for ecological restoration. And that's kind of the problem, right? So seed balls have been used for a very long time, ostensibly with good outcomes. I know a lot of managers that use seed balls and they work, but there's almost a total lack of basic design principles for seed balls based on science. And this is a problem because when I start talking about seed balls and people are like, oh, how do they work? How big do I need to make them? When do I put them out? How many do I put out? I don't know. I know what works for me and the small number of experiments I've done, but these experiments either haven't been replicated elsewhere or they're really small. And if we want widespread use and deployment of seed balls, then we need some of this really fundamental information about seed ball design. And that's one of the big things we do in my lab. So in my lab, we do some really basic experiments to try to find out some of the most fundamental aspects of seed balls so that when people ask me for recommendations based on science, I actually have that information for them. Okay, so one small experiment we ran is figuring out, is there an optimal nutrient source for seed balls? So remember, seed balls in general are made of three things. There's seeds, there's a clay or binding agent to keep the ball together, and then there's some nutrients. And some people, I've read stuff that some people use cat litter, some people use activated charcoal, there's people who use compost or worms, there's all kinds of stuff, and that's all awesome. However, it would be great if we had science-based recommendations on what kind of things to use. So I ran a really simple test, and I actually did this with some high schoolers at a local high school. And of course, it's at a local high school. And it's awesome. I love working with high schoolers. And we just tested 3 different nutrient bases. So we made a bunch of seed balls, all with the same amount of clay, all with the same type of seeds. But we either use potting soil that you can get from Home Depot, mushroom compost, or manure. And manure is actually a really important thing to test because very often arid land restoration, we're deploying seed balls on working landscapes or landscapes where there are animals, typically livestock. So a lot of people want to use the manure from that livestock because it's free, it's easily available, and you're likely inoculating with the ground with the beneficial microbial organisms that are in the soil and in the plants that the things have been eating, right? So the outcome of this work, this is a terrible graph and I apologize, but essentially what this graph is showing is the summed germination. So germination from an individual seed ball. So there's multiple seeds in one seed ball through time. That's on the x-axis. And I really apologize for this graph, but all you need to get from this graph is that higher lines are better. It means more germination. And we found that you always get higher germination and establishment of those seedlings when you include manure in the seed balls. And again, this is awesome news because one, you can easily go to Home Depot and buy some manure, or if you're working on a working landscape where you have horses or sheep or cows or whatever, you can actually use that manure and would probably end up eliciting a higher response of the seeds in terms of germination. So is there an optimal seed ball size or density? So one of the benefits of seed balls is you can make them with your hands and throw them out the back of a ATV. You can throw them out the car window. You can throw them off the back of a horse. You can throw them off the back of a plane. So they're really easy to handle and to use. And often sort of the idea is that you want to make them about an inch in diameter, but that I could not find where that comes from, and it is certainly not based on science. So we were trying to figure out, is there this optimal size of seed balls? And if you add more seeds in the seed balls, do you get a higher percentage of germination? So obviously you're going to have more seeds, you're probably going to get more plants, but do you get more plants than you might expect? So I conducted another experiment, mostly driven by another set of high schoolers, where we manipulated a bunch of different things. So we had 4 sizes of seed balls from 2 inches in circumference or diameter to 1/2 inch in diameter. And these are real sort of sizes, because usually smaller ones, if you have more seed balls, you're going to want them smaller. Bigger seed balls if you're just throwing them out with your hands. We had 4 densities of seeds. So in the seed balls, we either had 5 seeds, 10 seeds, 15 seeds, or 20 seeds. And we did this with 4 different species. And we picked these 4 species specifically because they had very different sizes of seeds. So we had one of our species had really, really tiny seeds, and it went all the way up to another species, I don't remember, that had really big seeds. So what did we find? Well, if you've got big seeds, you're going to get more germination, which is something we kind of knew from before any of these studies. Seed scientists and most plant scientists know that bigger seeded species are just much more likely to have germination. But it doesn't matter how big your seed ball is or how many seeds you put in there. Okay, you get the same amount of germination. So that's pretty cool. So what that suggests is, like, seed balls aren't too finicky, right? So far, this stuff shows that if you want to make some seed balls and you want to be successful, make sure you use some manure. And it doesn't really matter how many seeds you put in or how many seeds end up in there. And it doesn't really matter how big they are. So if you're making them by hand, which a lot of people do, and you end up with different size seed balls, it doesn't matter. If you want more information, the high school students, amazing high school students I work with, actually wrote all this up into a cooperative extension document that you can find on my website at gornishlab.com. And of course, you can always send me an email and ask me. So another question, do seed balls care about the soil conditions? So again, one of the benefits of seed balls is that they're sort of weighty. So they weigh down on the ground. So you don't need to worry so much about seed to soil contact. So is it important to do something like tilling, for example? So another experiment that we ran in California, where we threw seed balls out in plots that were either tilled with a hand tiller or not. And what this is showing is that the seeded species cover, which is on the y-axis, is showing across these different species. On the x-axis, and what species they are, it doesn't matter, but we had both forbs and grasses. And you can see that in tilled plots, those are the blue bars, there was a significantly higher germination than non-tilled plots. So seed balls, in that sense, seem to be like seeds in that they do prefer tilled areas. If you want more information about how to make seed balls, on the left here, I have a cooperative extension document that my lab has created that has just sort of best practices for making seed balls by hand. You can find that on my lab website, gornishlab.com. Another thing about seed balls is that they're super easy to make. Okay, anyone can make them. I've made them with children, I've made them with all kinds of people, and you can make them by hand, which is great. However, if you're making seed balls for like a really large scale, like 3 acres or more restoration experiment, making seed balls by hand is going to take forever because you're going to have to make a lot. So my lab has developed a bicycle that you can turn into a seed pelletizing machine. So about $130 you're going to need in materials if you already have a bike lying around. And you can turn a bicycle into a seed pelletizing machine. And this bike can make like 5,000 seed balls in like 7 minutes. It's crazy. And the guide is freely available also on my website. If you want a hand version of it, if you want a paper version of it, send me an email and I'll mail you one, okay? In case I have time, which I think I do, I just wanted to tell you a couple of other things that my lab is working on that is kind of relevant to seed balls, but certainly relevant to arid land restoration. So one of the purported benefits of seed balls is that they protect the seeds from granivory. So everyone here knows, or mostly everyone here, that if you do restoration, seed-based restoration, and throw seeds out on the landscape anywhere where you have small mammals or ants or any other granivores, a lot of that seed is going to be taken off the landscape before it even has time to germinate. In fact, I personally think more seed is leaving the landscape than we give credit for, but that's another talk for another day. So seed balls, one of their purported benefits is that this dried sort of package protects the seeds inside the seed ball from granivores. There has been some work from Oregon that shows that actually granivores in some cases will preferentially go to the seed balls, because if you throw them out before they're completely dry, there's moisture in them and they'll actually eat the seed balls to get the moisture. 5 minutes. Thanks, Melanie. But something we've been finding is that if you throw out a bunch of seed balls of favored, containing favored seeds of seed-eating ants, the ants will actually go in and crack at the seed balls and pull the seeds out, which is like mind-blowing. I don't know, I was blown away. And I've been going down this like vortex of reading about ants and dry light systems. It's amazing. So ants can be a major significant challenge to seed-based restoration in arid systems, either with naked seed or with seed balls. So one of the things we're looking at in my lab is there a way that you can identify candidate species for restoration in ant-dominated systems, which in the Southwest is essentially everywhere, to enhance restoration success? That would be by reducing granivory. And what we're actually finding, and what has been known for a little while, but hasn't necessarily made it so much into the restoration world, is that ants have preferential, they prefer seeds that don't have a lot of stuff on it, okay? They prefer seeds that don't have awns or fluffy appendages or wings or all kinds of things, okay? So if ants are less likely to want to handle seeds that have a seed coat or an awn or whatever, if you have a whole list of species that you can choose from for your restoration project, seed appendages could be one of the things you use to sort of narrow down that species list, because you know that if you throw out a grass seed that has a super long awn rather than a grass seed that doesn't, that grass seed with the long awn is going to stay on the ground for longer because the ants are less likely to take it off than this sort of naked seed with no appendage. We have found that with seed balls, we have the exact same germination if you use fluffy seeds or seeds with appendages versus seeds without appendages. We found that there's no difference in forbs or grasses in seed balls. So we're doing both studies looking at kind of how seed balls do when you have seeds with different appendages, as well as the handling time of seeds with appendages. Something else we're looking at is that in our particular system, the ants that are particularly problematic are these guys, Pogomerinix. I deeply apologize to anyone who actually knows how to pronounce that word, but they have an enemy ant. So there's these tiny little ants that actually smell like brandy. And these enemy ants will like take this chemical off their head, and these guys don't like it. So what we've actually tested is like crushing a bunch of these enemy ants and mixing them into the seed balls to see if that actually reduces granivory. And that will be an awesome, I don't know yet what we're going to find, but I'll tell you about it. We're really interested in sort of technologically simple and monetarily cheap approaches to ecological restoration. We're not coming up with anything new in my lab. As I've said, the seed balls have been around forever. We're just trying to formally identify science-based recommendations for design. Same thing with rock structures. So my lab is really interested in looking at how you can use media lunas, which are these piles of rocks and sort of half moon structures across the landscape, to slow moving water and capture seeds and organic material. We're finding that this is an excellent way to reduce erosion because you're reducing the intensity of moving water, as well as enhancing germination because the rocks can shade the soil surface, and enhancing establishment because it's really much harder for animals to like get that. This is an animal trying to eat a little seedling. It's much harder for animals to eat the growing seedlings when they're sort of in the cracks of the rocks. This is super easy to do. You do need labor, but often you can find rocks for free, especially from mines. And in Arizona anyway, as long as you're not penetrating the soil surface, you don't need to get any special permits to put rocks on the ground. So we're finding that this is a really awesome approach to sort of enhancing multiple or achieving multiple management goals on degraded arid land systems. You're reducing erosion, you're enhancing soil nutrients, and you're enhancing plant cover. And we're looking at these both just putting the rocks down as well as adding seed balls. And seed balls love being in these rock structures just as much as naked seed. And that is it. I know I just blew right through that. I was worried I was going to be too long, but I am happy to take any questions. And if I'm not able to answer your question, please send me an email, and I'm really responsive on email, and I'm happy to send you whatever material you want.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elise, for that presentation. Really cool stuff.
Thanks, Megan.
Yeah. So we have time for a few questions, and as a reminder, I'll be pulling them from the Q&A box icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And again, if you see a question that you'd like answered, like it, and it'll move to the top so we can prioritize those first.
Oh boy.
So first question we have for you is, how far in advance of seed ball application can you make the seed balls? Can you store them properly, and what is properly for later use?
That's a great question. So typically you make the seed ball, and in Arizona, it's taken 2 to 3 days for them to dry. Typically what we've done is thrown them out on the landscape immediately. I've seen seed balls that have sat on the landscape for almost a year. So in 2020, I installed a bunch of experiments that all failed because Arizona had a huge drought. There was literally no rain. And seed balls are not a panacea. If it doesn't rain, they don't work. But I had seed balls that stayed out for a year, and the following year when it rained, they germinated. Oh,
sorry, I'm on mute.
Okay.
Next question is, it's a little bit of a long one. Seed ball / pellet / puck research has been going on and failing in the US, Australia, and Canada for at least 2 decades. They've always failed either because of predation or because of the difficulties of finding a mix that withstands impact but imbibes quickly with little water and has good retention.
Oh.
Why are your seed balls working and so many others have abandoned the research?
Yeah, so one of the things we're not doing is dropping seed balls out of airplanes. So the impact is not an issue. The biggest impact our seed balls are experiencing is sort of coming out of the saddle of a horse. I know that there's a company called Drone Seed that's working on seed balls coming off of drones, and I haven't heard about there being any issues with that. But so that's one of the things that we don't have to deal with. I think something else that we're attempting to do that I haven't seen in other studies is we're trying to get these like very fundamental aspects sort of understood. And often these fundamental aspects of like, how big should the seed ball be? Like, how much clay do you put in? Stuff that people are like, we don't need to worry about that. We already know. We don't know. Nobody's tested it. You can go online and like Google seed balls, and like a million things pop up, but none of those are tested. They're all just like what people have been doing. So I'm not saying that our seed balls are working in the sense of we've had very good germination from our seed balls in our experimental sites, but they're not a panacea for sure. They're not a panacea. No, sorry. Thanks for the question, Lindsay.
Great, thanks. Okay, next question. This is a good question. Can this method have application in other climates?
Yeah, so I've seen some work of the use of seed balls in temperate locations, and one study in a tropical location, and it works. It's just I don't know if the aspects of the characteristics of the seed ball really directly address the major challenges to arid land restoration specifically. So I think they could be used anywhere, but I don't know if they confer as much extra germination or establishment in a tropical area as they compared to naked seed as they would in an arid system.
Sense. Next question. If you are applying dormancy breaking techniques, would you do this before or after the seeds are in balls?
Yeah, all the seeds we put in the seed balls, they have undergone any pre-treatment that they need, either the cleaning or the breaking and dormancy or whatever. I haven't tested. That's a good question. I haven't tested. We also have never used wild collected seed for our seed balls. It's purchased. So that's probably a whole other line of questioning that's really important.
Right. Okay. Next one is a little bit of a long one again. Do the tilled plots with higher germination of seed balls also have increased weed seed germination? Wondering about the trade-off longer term between successful seed ball germination and greater competition from weed seeds disturbed from tilling. Maybe there is an ideal tilling depth to support this.
Yeah, tilling, yeah, I'm with you. Tilling has, it's the good and the bad, right? And so, and there's the weeds, there's the carbon loss, all that stuff. So I don't necessarily know if I would suggest tilling for everyone, particularly people who are trying to, you know, restore like thousands of acres. Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. There's definitely bad stuff that happens when you till.
Okay, next question is, does an additive such as cayenne pepper reduce greenery?
Yeah, so there's Kara is probably referring to, there's this awesome paper from folks in Oregon that found that when you, their seed balls, those are the people that found that small mammals were actually preferentially eating the seed balls, probably to get the nutrients from the clay and the moisture. And so they tested using cayenne pepper mixed in with seed ball stuff, and it worked. We haven't tested cayenne pepper with ants, but we work with an ant biologist, and she was like, that's not going to matter. So we haven't tested, and ants are far and away the major problem for granivores in our system. So I haven't tested that, but you know, in other systems, that's an excellent paper. If you're throwing out seed balls and you see a lot of little things like chewing on your seed balls, wear gloves when you make your seed balls and mix in a ton of cayenne pepper, and that should work.
Okay, next question. How do you track germination of seed balls following variations in nutrient, agent, size, etc., vegetation monitoring on the landscape?
Yeah, so the experimental outcomes I showed you, that was all done in a greenhouse. So that was just like pot-based. Some of the larger studies that we do when we're just looking at, like, if you put 1,000 seed balls out, how many germinate? We do that at larger plot scales. They're never like huge. We don't drop them out of a plane and then see like how many plants can we find. We do them at like the 4 meter squared. We know exactly how many seed balls are going in. Sometimes we even mark where we put them, so then we can follow them.
Okay, and I think we have time for one or two more. I was also wondering this. Next question, have you found that some plant taxonomic groups establish better in seed balls than others?
Yeah, so we haven't tested that, and I think that's an excellent question. I do know that a lot of people use seed balls for pollination, pollinator habitat, and so they will just stuff a ton of forbs in. Totally works. We've done it with just grass seed, just forb seed, mixing them, and it seems to work. I'm sure that there's probably some species that prefer being in seed balls versus others, but we haven't gotten there yet. But that's an excellent question.
Okay, cool. I think we have time for one more. How do you track germination of seed balls following, oops, we did that one, sorry. If using fresh or local manure, is there a worry of non-native seeds surviving digestion and being present in the dung, potentially spreading invasives in your seed balls?
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. So I am of the mind that there is absolutely no way that you can do ecological restoration probably anywhere, but certainly in arid landscapes, without like something happening or going wrong. And I think that the benefits that you get conferred from like the native microbiome and like sort of the inoculation effect you're getting from dung would probably supersede sort of the weed seeds, but absolutely, it, you know, if you're using stuff from the landscape, you're going to get weed seeds. But I think it might be worth it. But I haven't tested that. I don't have data on that.
Okay, great. That's all the time we have for questions.
Thank you.
Thanks again. So I'll hand it back to Maria to introduce our next speaker.
Okay, thanks so much, Elise. That was a great talk, and there's a lot of enthusiasm in the chat too, so make sure to take a look at that if you have time. And there are still a few unanswered questions, so Elise, if you have a second to stay on, you're welcome to type answers into those questions in the Q&A. Thanks. Alrighty. So our next speaker is William Hutchinson, and William, you are welcome to turn on your video and get your slides set up while I introduce you.